Cove Productions presents the Solo in South Philly podcast with your host and local legal whiz, with knowledge, Mark Kachi.
What's good, everyone? Welcome to the Solo in South Philly podcast. Our season 1 is called Law School Reunion. It is a remix with the homies from the Midwest side. Each episode, I will be reuniting with a different law school colleague. We will discuss what led them to law school, their law school experience, and what they do now. Today's guests are Ricardo and Rene Diaz. Ricky and Rene both attended the University of Western Florida and obtained their JD from the Thomas M. Cooley Law School. Ricky has worked as an assistant state attorney for the Florida State Attorney's Office and as assistant general counsel for the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation. He was also assigned to the 9th Judicial Circuit's Violent Crimes Unit, and in these roles, he has investigated and prosecuted cases involving large-scale multinational drug trafficking organizations, human trafficking, money laundering, and attempted murder. Rene clerked for the Honorable Paul Rasmussen of the 1st Judicial Circuit of Florida. Following her clerkship, she worked as an assistant state attorney for the Florida Office of State Attorney and has since transitioned into insurance defense, where she works as a trial attorney for Allstate. Ricky and Rene were in my law school section. Over my first year, I got to know them really well. They were a couple that I always admired. They always had a plan to graduate law school in 2 years, and they stuck to it. But not only that, they performed well academically. They took part in extracurricular activities and still made it to parties and road trips. Ricky and Rene are the type of people who will drive hours to hang out with you when you are in town, even if that means sacrificing their sleep on the eve of a court date. All right, let's welcome Ricky and Rene to the program. Ricky and Rene, thank you for joining.
Hey, Mark, long time no see.
I know.
Thanks. Good to see you.
All right. So let's talk about life before law school. What was the story with you two in terms of your marriage, right? Because I know you had a ceremony during the midst of law school. Were you guys married, or was there something about a common law marriage? I don't know. So let's talk about that.
Well, I'll leave it to Rene because there's a lot of dates involved now.
That's funny. It's, long story short, we just like getting married. No, so we met very early on in college. And we decided pretty quickly that we were going to be together long term. So
debatable. I had to chase for like 6 months as she's just swatting all attempts. It wasn't that quick. I had to work for it.
I meant like once the relationship began, but after a few years, we did. So this was me pretending to be a lawyer before I was a lawyer. So I did some research, and in the state of Florida, they don't recognize common law marriage unless you're recognized by another state that does recognize common law marriage. And so there's this little loophole that I figured out where in Alabama, you can do a common law marriage contract. So we were very close to the border. We lived in Pensacola. So we just hopped on over and did a quick common law marriage contract almost right before we started law school. We decided to make it more official and just do the marriage certificate with the state of Florida. So we did that about 2 years later. Right before law school started. And then it was actually decided by my family after the fact, once we graduated, that, they wanted to do a ceremony. And so we were like, okay, fine, not a big deal. So we ended up having a full wedding with the priest and all of that stuff right after law school finished.
Wow. So you guys said I do 3 times technically, right?
Yes. I wanted to make it a tradition because at that point it had been every 2 years, basically, we were getting married. So I told him like 2 years later, let's get married again. He was like, we've done it enough. I think everybody knows we're stuck together.
Yeah, I've heard of people renewing their vows after 10 years, 20 years, which you guys got it all in within the first couple of years, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
We're bucking those divorce statistics because 3 marriages, no divorces.
So, okay, pre-law school, right? If I remember correctly, Ricky, you're Mr. 305. You're from Miami, right?
Yep.
And Renee, you're military brat. So did you live all over?
I did. So I'm an immigrant. I was born in the Philippines. I am half American, but my biological father was not a part of my life. So I was like born and raised full Filipino. When I was young, my mother met my dad, and so they got married, and we started the Navy life. And I lived all over California, Guam, a lot of I think that's pretty much it, like throughout around the Pacific.
And then how did you end up in Florida?
College. So I started, before I picked my college, I had a contract with the Air Force for a scholarship with Air Force ROTC. And so I wanted to go to California because that's where I was quote unquote from. That's what I was familiar with because I did high school in Guam. I wanted to go to Stanford, but my parents were very like, no, you're not going to the West Coast, go somewhere else. So I ended up just going to school in Florida where my parents got stationed in Pensacola. So I went to the University of West Florida and they had an Air Force ROTC detachment there. So that's where I just happened to end up.
Okay. And for those who don't know, so the ROTC deal, because I have a friend that did it, you wake up, you do your PT in the morning 3 times a week. And I think you take a bunch of classes, and your junior year, I think you go away to like a camp to basically learn to be an officer. And then you get commissioned the night before you graduate and you go in as an officer, right? And in exchange, they pay for your college, right?
Pretty much. So if you're in the scholarship track, you're contracted from the beginning, and that camp, little boot camp, it's like a short officer candidate school. It happens in the summer between your sophomore and your junior year. So if you're in the scholarship track, which I was, you're contracted from the beginning, and you're expected to do that all the way through. I had a lot of issues and ended up getting out right before that camp, and ended up, having to pay back my scholarship and all of that other stuff. If you go the other track, which is the track that Ricky had been on, this is how we met, was in Air Force ROTC. You basically start off, you're doing the same classes, you're doing the same PT, you're participating, but you're not contracted until you get to that camp in your sophomore year. And then at that point you become contracted, and then you can finish all the way through, graduate as an Air Force officer.
So neither of you ended up going through with it?
Nope.
No.
Okay. And Ricky, as I understand, in Florida, it's the only place you go north to get south, and the only place to go south to get north, right? So you're coming from Miami, which very cosmopolitan, international city, and making your way over to the Panhandle. What was that experience like for you?
It was weird. Renee likes to, I guess, take all the credit for being an immigrant, but after being to Miami, I think she understands I'm probably more of an immigrant than she is, because I was born and raised in my whole life. I remember the first time we went down together, she's like, well, I'm going to Publix for some breakfast items. I'm like, you don't know Spanish. Just stay put. Like, give me a second. Stubborn. She goes out, she comes back, and she's furious. Like, I went to Publix and then I went to McDonald's. Nobody spoke Spanish. I couldn't get anything done. Like, I warned you. Like, I straight up warned you. That is not like the rest of America. It is. I mean, it's South America, Central America, the Caribbean, but it is not like America. But it was weird, man, because I still remember the first time kind of getting up there, and for the first time in my life, really being the minority in any room. I'd never been the minority. I'd never understood that concept. But there I was. And I went up there because it was literally as far away from Miami as I could get while keeping my in-state tuition. But it was a learning experience, to say the least. culture shock for sure.
Yeah. Beautiful place though, right?
It's awesome. Like I said, it has its drawbacks, but there's also a lot of positives to it. I wouldn't take it back. It brought me my wife, my kids, ultimately. It was a good experience.
Yeah.
Beaches are world class.
Yeah. I got to make it my way down there one of these days. So how'd you end up in law school? Rene, I see you majored in legal studies, so that I'm guessing that was always on the mind. Ricky, what
No.
about you? No? All right, go ahead.
No.
Let me know.
So, like I said, I started out in the Air Force ROTC. I wanted to be a military pilot. That was not going to be a thing for me. I grew up in a very strict Asian home. And, you're only successful if you're some version of a doctor, scientist, or a lawyer. So my major starting in undergrad was biochemistry. After a semester or two, I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I think I hopped around to like management information systems, accounting, and then it ended up having just this come to Jesus moment of what do I want to do with my life? And had a talk with Ricky actually, where he was like, you can basically do whatever you want to do. I'm going to go to law school. You can be really good at this. I think you like this. Why don't you try it out? So I tried out legal studies and it stuck.
Ricky, what led you to law school?
My original intent was to be an engineer. And then I got to my math classes and I'm like, this ain't going to be for me. So I literally just started taking the survey courses, and I ended up in, and I think one of the survey like pre-law legal studies courses, and I liked it. And I took a couple more, and it was still like a feel out process. And I ended up in a crim law class where to this day, I remember I got an answer wrong. And I still disagree with it. And I think the question to the exam, Rene might have already been in this, was, can you prove a murder for leaving a child in a hot car? And I'm like, yeah, in Florida, depending on the facts, absolutely. And I got docked. I'm like, no. So from there on out, I'm like, I'm going to law school. I'm going to prove this one wrong. Like I'm still chasing that one question. But it was, I do a lot of what I do to prove others wrong for some reason. That's just what drives me. And in hindsight, honestly, it's a pretty big regret of mine to have gone to law school. Hindsight 2020, I probably would have just been a cop. I'd have been so much closer to retirement. It would have been just as fulfilling. Not that I don't enjoy what I do. It's just, I don't know that I'm as fulfilled as I could have been by just going into law enforcement. No student loans. Like I said, I think it fit me more than the lawyer life.
It's a good point. So law school is a broad spectrum. We learn all sorts of things. Some of it we remember, some of it we don't. And I think people forget that we're learning jurisprudence, really, like legal philosophy. And I think it's a beautiful thing because these brilliant minds put together these ideas of what is fair and this sort of thing. But being a police officer, you're immersed in criminal procedure. You have to know those laws in order to question people properly and get away with it, to do things that are not going to get tossed out in court or suppressed. So you can still have that love for the law, just that area of the law, and be focused in it. Because as a lawyer, chances are you're going to be in one area as well.
Yeah, I think honestly, because my goal, even going into law school, is to be a prosecutor. That was it. I didn't want to go into civil. I didn't want to go into defense work. But I think prosecutor and cop go hand in hand. Like you basically don't have one without the other. They can make all the arrests they want. They go nowhere without us. And at least my background, when I ended up at the task force, I was working hand in hand with them from the jump, from the very beginning of a case. I was there with them. So to this day, I think it was 5-6 years I was there. We never had anything suppressed, period, because we did it the right way. So it was one of those, that experience in particular kind of drove home the point, like, once again, I enjoy what I do. I think I'm good at it, but this other side's pretty cool too. And I think I could have done really well there.
I don't think he gives himself enough credit. He's actually, I think, objectively one of the best minds in Florida, which is where we practice, with respect to criminal law and specifically organized crime, because that's what he specialized in for a long time. People from all over the state still talk to him and reach out to him for advice. He pioneered some pretty obscure things, like an investigation which involved basically establishing a conspiracy between a person in Florida and a Chinese website that was funneling fentanyl over. So he's done some pretty cool stuff. I mean, he wouldn't have been able to do that but for the experience of going to law school and becoming a lawyer.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you decide there was a decision to go to law school. How'd you end up at the Thomas M. Cooley Law School?
I love this question. And I loved when you were talking to Shane about it. I loved that you guys discussed and tackled that issue of like how people kind of tended to look down on Cooley. I loved my Cooley experience. I think they prepared us for the bar better than I think that we would have been able to do in other situations. But getting to your question, I already kind of alluded to it. I bounced around a lot in college. I didn't do well because of the fact that I just didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. I ended up getting a pretty decent LSAT score, and we kind of had to come to this decision about what we were going to do. We took a little longer than we wanted to get through college. Cooley was the best option in terms of we knew with concrete proof that we'd be able to get in, what we would have to pay. We essentially were able to go 2-for-1 with the scholarships that we got. And we knew that we would be able to do it in 2 years, which was important to us. And not only that, we knew we'd be able to do it with the last semester being back in Florida with an internship and a directed study. And that fast track combined with a scholarship really made the decision for us.
Ricky, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. It was one of those, we had guaranteed acceptance. Even though it was pricey, we each got scholarships. And like Rene, from engineering to just fishing around to see what I wanted to do. I had a lot of credits and a lot weren't great because when I found something that I didn't like, I just didn't care, didn't do it. But I could take a test and I can score high. So Cooley made it so that we're guaranteed in, we can knock it out in 2 years. And it was just, once again, it was also an added plus that we got to move to another part of the country I think neither of us had ever seen. And it was nice getting out of our comfort zone. We literally moved to Lansing sight unseen. I still remember Rene had rented our apartment. We pull up and she's like, okay, here it is. Like, all right, what floor is it? 3rd floor. And it's a 100-year-old building with no elevator. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. 3rd floor or 3rd and a half because it's weird. But it was, once again, Cooley, Lansing, it was all a good time. But yeah, Cooley was because we can get it knocked out in 2 years.
So let's talk about the LSAT. A lot of our classmates, I would say, were at Cooley because they did poorly on the LSAT. How are you able to do well on it to the point where you were able to get a scholarship?
For me, I've always been a better test taker than anything else. It's not an understatement to say my GPA only went up as I progressed through school. In terms of my undergrad GPA is higher than my high school GPA. My law school GPA is higher than my undergrad GPA. I think for me, it was a lot of focusing in on what actually interested me. And as I got interested, I put more work into it. But I've always been a good test taker. That wasn't ever a problem for me.
Did you guys take any courses for the LSAT?
No.
No. I've always loved puzzles and always loved, and I think that helped me out with a lot of the, the logic games and things like that. That's just up my wheelhouse. That's fun for me. That's like, if and they put out like a logic games book, that would be a hobby for me. So that, I mean, I think just happened to be up my alley. Our LSAT experience is kind of unique in that we had, my understanding is this is the first time that it had happened in the history of the LSAT. I don't know if it's happened since then. But we had a proctor who relied too heavily on her Motorola Razor, which was her timekeeping device, ages us a little bit. And she ended up knocking or finishing one of the sections 5 minutes earlier than she was supposed to.
Oh my God.
Which, if you're familiar with the LSAT, because what they ended up deciding to do was they just gave us the 5 minutes at the end after the exam was completely finished. But with the LSAT, that's not helpful because you get a group of questions that you answer from a particular, reading section or from a particular set of facts if you're doing the logic game. And you're using that information across several questions. And it's a lot to have to take in. So for her to just kind of at the end give us, okay, here's your 5 minutes back, didn't really do much for anyone. So I've always been curious. We never took it again. We did well enough that we said, you know what, we're just going to not push our luck here. But I'm still curious to see if we could have done better, having that, extra 5 minutes that they didn't give us.
Yeah, I highly recommend Malcolm Gladwell. Are you familiar with him? He wrote Outliers, and he's just my favorite. But he has a podcast, and he did this whole thing on the LSAT and how the time component is like huge. And then he ends up taking it along with one of his assistants who's also going to law school. But yeah, it's such a crazy element of the exam that a lot of preparing for it is just managing your time. And I think I mentioned this with someone else. Like one of the courses even says, like, look, you're not going to finish. So when you get to the section, statistically B or whatever, they had the breakdown of what letter was most common. So take B and just fill it down the line. And, that could be worth a point or two at the end. So there's a lot of things that you can look into that'll help your score.
Maybe jumping ahead, but that completely burned me on the Florida bar. I was very big on basically analytics. Even prepping for our first term exam with Professor Scott, I had his answer key and I had it broken down. It's like, I know these are all going to be questioned on. And I carried that through law school and I did it for the bar. And on the essay, I didn't prep at all for the essay. I broke down the last 10 years worth of exams and I'm like, they always test on these three subjects, like 100% of the time. These are three core subjects that they test on. So we get to the bar, I open up the exam, I read through the essays. None of those subjects are there.
Yikes.
That was my bet. And I just went bust and I'm like, oh my God. So, I mean, it wasn't all bad because at that point I became pretty relaxed. I'm like, well, it could only get better from here. And we passed, but man, that was a bet I took that blew up in my face pretty bad.
It's funny you say that because my last guest bet right on the bar exam. You bet. I shared a story about how I bet right, and then you bet wrong. So it shows betting is never an exact science.
No, it was 10 years of analytics down the drain on our one bar exam. I'm like, what is this? There is no crim law. I think no torts, no. And it was weird. It was Florida constitutional law and homestead and
well, that was on it. That was a constitutional law. Florida. The Florida Constitution was always on the essays, so that was the one that stayed. We just happened to be, and he was a victim of the changes they were starting to implement in the Florida bar exam. Florida is, one of the most attorney-heavy states in the country, and I think they were trying to crack down on, admissions and things like that. And so we were at the beginning of this curve where they were changing the bar exam. He was not prepared for it.
So let's go back to law school briefly. Let me ask you this. So Cooley was a place where a good percentage of people failed out, right? It was people were on edge because you're going in there, you have all this information, and it all comes down to 1 3-hour exam. And if you guess wrong, that could be failing the exam or have a bad day or something happens, you could fail an exam, you could end up getting kicked out. Now you, Rene, right? Because people are kind of sizing each other up in the beginning of the year, like based on what people say in class. And from what I remember, I didn't sit near you, but from what I remember, what people said about you was that you were online shopping during class, right? So grades come out and we find out that you booked, which means got the highest score in 1 or 2 of the classes while taking a full load. You guys took 15 credits. Some people took as little as 9 the first semester. So how did you do all of this? I want the secret sauce.
I don't know that there is one. My brain is just weird. So I'm not witty, right? I'm not quick with like responses and things, but the best way to explain it is that just I don't necessarily think fast, but I just want to kind of get the concept and move on. I am not good with belaboring something, and going in and fleshing it out too much. Like I just want to understand something and get it and then add to it. You know what I mean? And I know I'm not articulating this well. And it goes with my learning. It goes with my test taking. I think, Mark, you used to give me a hard time because I just wanted to get in do my exam and get out. Because my thing is that if I knew, if I didn't go in there confidently, knowing what I knew and just putting it on the exam, if I thought about it too much, I would think myself out of the right answers. And so I've just always been that way. I've always been like, I want to just, get to the point of the conversation, get to the point. That's very much me. And that's how I learned. So that kind of goes to explain, when I was online shopping, it wasn't, to be like rude or disrespectful. It's just, I can't sit and think about something too much, or it's just going to turn into mush in my brain. Like, just give me the information, I'll process it. And then we can we can go for it. I know that it's weird. Most people don't think that way. Most people benefit from, talking things through. Right. I have never been one of those people.
Well, for me, it's a concentration thing. Like, I need to lower the volume to parallel park, right? Like if I had even a browser open, I would be missing what the professor was saying. So I'm jealous of people like you. So Ricky, what was your experience like in the beginning?
Oh, the beginning, better than Renee's because she stresses more than I do. But like I said, for contracts, I had broken that thing down to, I had the exam. Basically, I knew what was going to be tested on everything. And I get through it. I feel great about contracts. I think it was our first exam. We get out, we start talking about it. Renee asked me about the second essay. And I'm like, I don't have a second essay. And she's like, no, everyone had a second essay. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Straight up missed the entire second essay. And she starts freaking out. And I'm like, I'm not worried about it. I know I killed the rest of that exam, like everything. Sure shit, grades come out and I completely missed all the points for the second essay. And I still think I got like a B or a B plus, whatever it was. Wow. I think I missed outside of, the automatic, whatever it was for that essay. I may have missed 1 or 2 points on the rest of the exam. But that was an interesting one because I'm like, man, I have no recollection of seeing a second essay period ever. But the rest of it was, I think, high pressure to say the least, because in particular for us, we went all in on, we can get this knocked out in 2 years. And if we failed a singular class, both of our timelines, either of us, are completely thrown off. But at the same time, once again, what motivates me is proving others wrong. And I remember during even orientation that we told one of the guys that was like walking us through was like, oh, you're trying to knock it out in 2 years. That's not going to happen. And then we walked with him and I was like, what's up now? So it was a good time. But I think after that first initial introduction to what that test week was like, the others definitely seemed easier because we knew what to expect. It was very much not per se coast, because I think we did prepare every week for every class, but we got down to a schedule. It was nice and kind of easy, if you will. We had that 1 week in between exams where that was, I think for us, our hell week, where I remember getting to the point where I would study and I just could not retain anything else. And we'd have to like take a nap or something and we'd get back up and we'd get back at it. But I don't think since or before do I ever remember my brain just reaching a capacity where it can't take anything else. That was the worst week, I think, consistently throughout. And then you got to the test, and my thing is preparation. Once we got to the test, I was good to go. I wasn't worried.
So did you guys study together?
Yes and no.
Early on, more so because we had the same schedule. At one point, our paths did kind of deviate. But I think the first 2 terms, it was pretty heavy together, and then we kind of separated off.
Even when we were together, we would make our own outlines. We both just think differently. And so his outline didn't work for me and my outline didn't work for him. And so we'd talk, we work through things together. But like study time, we spent a lot of individual time, especially in that last week, just kind of processing it our own way.
Do you think it was beneficial to go to school with your spouse? Like, were you guys pushing each other, or did it get to the point where you're like, stop talking about law school? Like, I need a break from you. Like, what was that all like?
Pete, when we got there, we encountered a lot of negativity. So many people said, you guys aren't going to make it. You guys aren't going to, you're going to end up divorced. You're not going to get through. Like, your relationship is going to suffer. And, so that was a really interesting introduction. For me, I don't know what Ricky's experience was. I feel like having him strengthened me, having him there, having somebody to bounce things off of. So many of us, one interesting thing about Cooley is that people come from all over the country, all over the world. And so many people didn't know each other. I'm a person that needs to kind of warm up a little before I start getting close to anyone. And so having him there and having his support from the beginning, and knowing that we were in it together, for me, was invaluable.
And I tend to agree, at least the first term, because we didn't integrate into the group, you, DC, Chrissy, the rest of them, until basically second term. And I think first term is because we were so focused on what's this going to be like, get through it, because there was so much negativity. It not only you're not going to make it in the 2 years, you're not going to make it, period, all this stuff. And it was one of those that we kind of really didn't socialize much. We found a groove in that we'd get up in the mornings, I think, go to the gym, get back, prep for class, go to class, get back home. Once we got through that first initial term, we were able to, hang out at the happy hours. And then we knew what it was going to be like, and we were able to kind of relax. But the other thing about Cooley was, it was, I think, the first time, while it was hard, it was the first time where I think either of us could kind of relax in that through undergrad, we had jobs. I was bordering on a full-time job, paying my way through, and I did have some family support, but paying my way in large part through, paying our way in large part through school, through life, et cetera. And once we get to law school, we're able to just focus on law school. Yes, we got to pay the loans now, but no big deal. It was worth it for that time period to kind of kick back, just focus on us, on school, and get through it. I think a lot of people just got in their own heads and were projecting that on others. And it's like that wasn't our experience. We had a good time in law school. I think I can definitively say that for the both of us. It was a good time.
My only regret, and
Sorry,
after listening, no, sorry, go ahead. My only regret, and yes, even now I listen to you talk about it, was not doing the semester abroad. I think that it was impossible for us because of the track we were taking. We had an extremely strict kind of way we had to do our classes to get out of there in the time that we wanted to. So I don't think it was ever going to be a possibility, but I really wish I had done it. It sounded amazing.
Yeah, I remember trying to sell you on it, and you both were like, no, we got our plan. It'll deviate from the plan. But back to what Ricky was saying, and I think so many law students in general miss this, is that I worked a little bit during college, and then I joined the workforce for a couple of years after college, and I didn't like it. And that's one of the reasons I went to law school, because I didn't really like what I was doing. And when I got there, I was on the same deal. I took out the full boat so that I didn't have to work. And I was like, this is glorious. I was like, if I put 40 hours a week into this, and that's all I have to do, I would much rather be doing that than going to work for 40 plus hours. And when I see people complain, I would always be like, this is the place to be. You don't want to be out there. So yeah, I think that's great perspective that you have. And I think it does help when you don't really get to enjoy the student life, and then you do get to do it. And you really appreciate it because people take things for granted. So let's talk about post-law school. What happened then? What happened after graduation?
So immediately after graduation, I went off to Japan, which is where my parents lived, to spend some time with them there. Ricky went off to Miami. After some time, we got together and really buckled down for the bar. We ended up only having a few weeks to study. We were in my parents' home in Florida. Since they were in the military, they were in Japan. They had their home in Florida, which they had been renting out. They ended up stripping it down. There were no floors. It was just like the cement. The paint was off the walls. And that's where we were. We literally put an air mattress and bought a desk off of, I don't know, whatever the version of OfferUp was back then, Craigslist. And that's all we had in the whole house was an air mattress and a desk. And we buckled down for a few weeks for the bar. Going back to what I said earlier, I give Cooley credit. I don't know that we would have passed it, but for our experiences and their preparation of our, and our knowledge and preparation going in. But after that, we kind of moved around a little bit. My recollection is I started back with a firm that I had been working with before law school. And then, after, Ricky always knew he wanted to be a prosecutor. Our timing was horrendous because it was like basically a statewide freeze because of the recession for hiring. So he went to the first place that was able to take him, which was in Daytona. I decided that mass torts, which is what I was doing at the time, wasn't for me. So I went off and went to the state attorney's office with him. I wanted to do juvenile work. So I did that for a little bit. And we really started our lives there.
Yep, same.
Impressive.
Tracked.
Sorry, what was that, Ricky?
Same. It was, we tracked kind of step for step. I do remember one of the fun things in prepping for the bar. So we didn't take a prep course. We were basically in the shell of a house. We prepped there for a couple of weeks with just books and whatnot. And then the week before the bar, we went to Tampa to kind of really get away from everything and just focus on that, on the bar. And it was a miserable experience in terms of the outside distractions. I think before the first day, our car is broken into. And like, okay, they took some stuff, and it was one of those, like, I don't care. Like, at this point, I really don't care at all. The bar is more important. The night of the first day, not only is our AC busted in the hotel room, so we got to move rooms, but then here comes the cops knocking. This is like the middle of the night. It's like, oh, we found your stuff. We need you to come down and ID it. And I'm like, I really don't have time for any of this. I don't care. They can keep it at this point. But it was just one of those that talk about life throwing a wrench at you. It was just nonstop during the actual exam. But once again, we did all right. So we can look back at it right now and kind of laugh at just how hectic it was. But expect the unexpected. That's kind of what we took away from it, because we could not have foreseen all of that happening.
So your study environment brings me back to Rocky IV, when he decides to forego all the luxuries and move to Siberia to train. Do you feel like it was productive to be in an environment where there was nothing to look at but your books?
I think so. When we got to that point of attrition where we couldn't take anything more in, we would go out. I remember just walking the mall, having dinner just to kind of take that break, and then coming back and going right back at it. So we, at least through law school, were able to learn and recognize that point of diminishing returns where we just need to step away. Because I don't think you can go all the way through, at least not the way we were doing. But once again, I credit Cooley for that, where we learned our limits there. And we're good about, I think we went to the park, went to the library. Just every 6 or so hours, we would step away and kind of regroup.
Right.
Yeah, what we did was pretty extreme. I think I don't know. It was nice to not have any distractions of, other people or even like TVs or anything around us. The only thing I think I remember, Ricky had these little dolls that were made up by one of our friends from law school, Molly, and he would make little videos with the dolls when we were getting kind of loopy and just needed a mental break. That was his mental break. But it was good in the sense that we didn't have any distractions, and it kind of was similar to what we had done in law school, just literally shoveling as much information into our brains as we could.
I remember I've never been as appreciative of a quasi horror flick as Alien versus Predator, because it came out during that time period and we just needed a break and we went and watched it. And it's one of those, there's no real plot. It's just an alien trying to kill a predator. They're just going to fight. And it was like great, because it just got us to distract and didn't have to keep up with anything. It was awesome. Even though the movie actually sucks, at that time, it was incredible. It got us to just not focus on anything.
Yeah. So tell me about Daytona then. So you get to Daytona, and that's where things started professionally, right?
Yeah, we moved to Daytona, sight unseen as well, not knowing anything about the area. The only thing I knew about it was spring break. And I got in, I think one of my first weeks was bike week. So Daytona is big on their motorcycles and their racing. And my first experience, I think it's Friday, walking out, and there's this scantily clad, who should have been scantily clad individual in assless chaps walking down the street. And I'm like, what the hell have I signed myself up for? So come to find out that was bike week. And that's the dress code by and large for bike week. So I think Daytona may have been an even bigger culture shock than Pensacola was, because Pensacola, I come from a fairly conservative household. Pensacola was still fairly conservative. Daytona was not. Even though it's, by and large a Republican stronghold, it is not conservative. The things that go down in Daytona during these events is wild. But it was a good time. I think I got to grow as a prosecutor. We had a good time. I think I probably grew those first 3 or so years than I did at any other point. I grew more in those first 3 years than I did at any point in my career. We got our first house. Daytona was a good experience and a good part of our lives overall.
What are the major crimes that you're dealing with in Daytona?
In Daytona, I started off in misdemeanor, did that for a couple of years, ended up in felony. And over there in felony, well, misdemeanor was everything from disorderly conduct, which is the drunk people just fighting and arguing. DUIs were big. When we moved up to felony, we had everything from burglary of a dwelling to robbery to traffic homicides. So it was a big step up where I'm used to, in county court, our bread and butter was DUI to suddenly, hey, you have a traffic homicide, good luck. So that was an interesting transition, but it's one of those that, once again, I credit Cooley in a lot of ways for, because while it doesn't teach you to basically be an attorney, it does teach you to put in the work and be prepared. And that was one of the things I always kind of prided myself in. It's like, I may not know as much as somebody else, but I'm going to come in prepared one way or another. So we put in a lot of work, especially early on, to get up to speed. Because one of the things that I do like about being an attorney, period, is that there's no, for lack of a better word, handicap. You go in and you may be a day one attorney, and opposing counsel may have 20 years on you. Tough. It is what it is. You gotta be prepared for it. So it was a lot of that, especially early on. Now that we're later in our careers, I think everything levels off. And most of the time, if anything, I'm the one with the advantage. But it was a fun few first years. It's almost like an extension of law school where you're still learning, you're still figuring things out.
Yeah. So Rene, you were working at the state's office in Daytona. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, I also went to the state attorney's office, and I started in juvenile. I really, my, I guess, heart is for, I guess, young people. I really wanted to get involved in human trafficking and stuff like that at the time. And honestly, even still, there's not much in place to kind of address how to tackle that. It's such a difficult area to address. So I didn't really get into that much. Ended up leaving juvenile just because you have to progress. And then going up into felonies, we ended up moving over from Daytona into Orlando, which is in the middle of the state, and kind of progressed there. I got to the point where I had kids, and putting people away for life was not something that felt good to me anymore. So I made a transition and went into civil litigation. And just it wasn't something that was fulfilling, and it's very deep work. It's very hard work, and it just wasn't for me. So I moved on.
Yeah, it's some people have that switch and they can turn it off, but if you don't, you're taking those things home with you at night, right?
Yeah. And they're people. And one thing a good public defender does is they take that person and their story and their background and the good things about them and the things that have happened to them, and they bring them to the prosecutor, and they work together to try to figure something out that will, benefit them as well as protect society. Sometimes you can't do that though. And sometimes people are just dangerous. And even if you have a heart for them, and you feel bad for them because maybe they never had a shot based on their upbringing or whatever it is, your job as a prosecutor is as an extension of law enforcement, and you have to protect the public. And if somebody's dangerous enough, you've got to do your job. And so I definitely admire people for doing it. I enjoyed it. It's one of the best jobs I've ever had. We made some great friendships. You develop deep relationships with people that you work with there, but it became too heavy at a certain point for me, and I just had to step away.
So then what was civil litigation like? Was that insurance, or what were you doing?
Yeah, so I'm doing essentially insurance defense. I started off with a private firm. It actually was more like being a prosecutor than I thought. I thought, I'm going to be on the defense side. It's going to be different now. But it's almost like the tables turn at that point, because you're having to do so much work on the defense side than you anticipate. But Yeah, I'm doing injury law essentially now. I went from a small boutique firm into a national insurance carrier doing in-house for that. It's really interesting. It's a lot of medicine, which is also really interesting. It makes me think, what would life have been like if I went and just bit the bullet and went to med school? But it's cool. You learn a lot about, how the body works. I take a lot of it with me in trying to take care of my own body, my spine especially. And I'm the mom that's always telling the kids to sit with a back straight and stuff like that. Just little things that I take with me from work, and being mindful of taking care of yourself, because you see how people can be affected by even small little incidents based on, just how their body is at the time. We talk about that, the eggshell plane of stuff, but it can happen.
Skull,
yeah, it can happen.
So insurance defense, help me understand this. So you have person gets injured. Are we talking automobile? Or are we talking at work? Or where are we talking about?
I do mostly car accidents. I have a very small number of premises liability cases, but my 99% of my work is car accidents. So yeah, there's a car accident. People are very confused because they say, well, Florida's a no fault state. I don't understand. They're confused by it, but you can get sued if you're at fault in an accident and somebody's injured. And so they can either sue the person who caused the accident, and those people become my clients. Or depending on the situation and the amount of insurance, they can also sue their insurance company for their uninsured motorist coverage. And then the insurance company becomes my client. So it just depends on the situation and what the claims are, things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is some interesting stuff. One thing that a personal injury attorney always mentions is that they never mention that the insurance company's involved, because it would prejudice the jury, right? Because you see the poor little plaintiff and you think he's got no money. Maybe you go easy on him. You see this deep pocket insurance company standing there. Maybe you say, nah, he could use a little bit.
Yeah. And that's the joke. And it's true. It's, if you're talking about a third party client where a person's suing a person, then yeah, you're not supposed to talk about insurance, but everybody sitting there knows it's not a secret. And there's some truth to, I don't know. I'm trying not to be the jaded defense lawyer. I'm not saying people don't get hurt, because obviously people get hurt, but there's some truth to, I think, people thinking, oh, well, it's the insurance company, who cares? They've got deep pockets. But I think particularly in Florida, and it's not even necessarily my area of litigation, it's others like glass claims and PIP claims and homeowners claims and things like that. In Florida, we are seeing our insurance rates rise significantly, very quickly, and people are wondering why. And I'm like, well, maybe look over here, this huge business of litigation, you know what I mean? And yes, we have to make people whole. Of course we have to make people whole. I'm not saying that. It's just, maybe look at it with more I guess objective viewpoint than just, oh, well, the insurance company can take care of it. Just, throw the book at them.
I think the difficult thing that probably you deal with, or in this area of law, there's certain things in this world that are very serious. However, you cannot disprove it. And I'll give you some examples. If I have back pain, yes, that you could have a broken disc or something like that, but I could have it or I could not. It could be very serious. It could not. Depression, I don't know if that falls into your realm, but that's another thing. Depression is a very serious thing, but you can't disprove that somebody is depressed or have other psychological issues. Like if they say the right answers, the person treating them is going to diagnose them accordingly. And it becomes this thing. Are they lying? Are they telling the truth? If they're telling the truth, they should be made whole. If not, it's not fair.
It's tough. And doctors aren't they're there to treat their patients. They're not there to be skeptics. So they're going to take what their patients are telling them at face value. I never knock a doctor for that. But once we get into litigation, what we're asking juries to do is to take out that microscope and kind of analyze and see. And it's difficult because it's so easy to, well, the doctor says, and just go back to relying on that. And there's so many rules about what you're allowed to talk about and how much of their credibility you're allowed to attack. And in my experiences, the cases that I get to, end up litigating heavily are ones where I truly believe that there's something there, that we need to attack. Maybe there's something that somebody wasn't so truthful about and things like that. And they're tough because nobody wants to call somebody out for being untruthful or maybe embellishing a little bit. And when you're taking jurors who are just complete strangers and they're supposed to come and make that call, it's in some ways less serious than criminal law because, nobody's going to jail or anything. And so for them, they're like, why are we doing this? Just pay them, So I understand that. I get it. It's not, it's not easy to be in that seat for sure.
Right. So, Ricky, you deal with all the juicy stuff, huh?
I do.
So tell us about what you're working on.
Right now, I've kind of taken a step back because I had to switch offices. One of the things that even as a prosecutor, no one kind of forewarns you about is that it is very politically driven. The lead prosecutor goes up for election every 4 years. Even though I've been doing it for coming up on 12 years, I've gone through about 4 different state attorneys now. So every single time the vision, if you will, changes. The last state attorney, so my last major part, as I see it, of my career was at the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigations. It's a multi-agency task force where we focus on drug trafficking, human trafficking, the racketeering offenses, those things. And there I was basically embedded in the task force as their legal. And when it wasn't multi-jurisdictional, meaning it didn't cross over outside of our circuit, I would keep them and prosecute them. That was a position that I was appointed under Jeff Ashton. Aramis Ayala took over after her. And then she kept me there. And then with the latest state attorney, she decided my services were better suited in the violent crimes unit. So I was moved out of the task force. The issue for me was the task force was my end game. That was supposed to be a position from which you retire from. And we had a game plan set out since Jeff, adopted by Aramis, that I would stay there, would be my task force, and that's it. I'd be there till I retired. And then once that got kind of switched up on me, I decided that was a wrap for me at that office. But during my time in that position, man, we did everything. We did some work that I'm really proud of. One of the cases, and I won't mention names because it's still being prosecuted, but hopefully it comes to a conclusion pretty soon, is one where a defense attorney was human trafficking his clients, like knocking them up, representing them, pimping them out, the works.
Wow.
And it was an interesting one in that they come to me and they ask me, our agents, do you know this guy? Referring to the defense attorney. I'm like, no, it doesn't sound familiar. It's like, well, he's a defense attorney, blah, blah. And they give me a brief rundown. And I asked them, like, okay, our informant has text messages supporting it. I'm like, all right, how do we know that's his cell phone? And they dropped that's the number he advertises on his Florida bar page. And I'm like, all right, you've piqued my interest. So they find an ad, they make a controlled call. At that point, my recollection is they pulled court audio of him speaking. So we knew what he sounded like. And sure as heck, he's picking up the phone and he's talking about, the date and all the coded language. But I think that's, in terms of juiciness, that's probably the juiciest case. That one picked up some attention, but media attention and quality of work don't usually go kind of hand in hand, unfortunately, because there are other cases that we did a lot more good. I know we've had twice within my tenure there, we were awarded the Investigative Excellence Award by HIDA, which is the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. That's the designation for, I guess. So throughout the country, there are HIDA task force, and that's where the trafficking and controlled substances is a problem. Orlando, Central Florida is one of those. And throughout the country, we have them. And every year they give awards for the best agencies that are members of this task force. Twice in about 5 years, we've gotten them, where prior to my being there, we hadn't gotten any. So we're doing a lot of good work. And it wasn't just the traffickers were popping. One of the traffickers, I think, got indicted and had been convicted of murder, which we knew he was a murderer. And I think we've indicted him on 3 separate murders now. He just happened to be a drug trafficker, and it's one of those like, well, even if it's low hanging fruit, we're coming after you, and we'll see where everything else falls. But that guy in particular, we popped him for the trafficking. He was in custody. He couldn't get out, and now witnesses and victims feel a lot more comfortable coming forward, because that was one of the issues that the prosecution kept running into with regards to prosecuting him for the homicides and getting people on board. They're like, no, he's out there. He's going to kill me too. No thanks. So we were able to partner with a lot of different agencies to push to get the violent people off the streets. It also led me to trial quite a bit. I know Rene she lost the itch to put people away. I'm totally good with it. I have no qualms about it. They deserve the time they get. They did it to themselves in a lot of ways. But our guys, I get it. Like one of the last guys that I put away for life, he had been released for robbery with a firearm. I have him again with robbery with a firearm, aggravated battery with a firearm. And in Florida, we have the PRR statute, which is a reclassification and minimum mandatory sentence statute that says that if you're released within 3 years from prison and you commit one of these qualifying offenses, you're getting the max, like period. The fun thing about him, and not fun thing because there are victims in all this, was that he had a co-defendant who flipped on him. It was a young kid, never been in trouble before. But during his deposition, he's testifying that he's literally stomping the guy's head in, the victim's head in, and saying, I need to kill him on PRR life.
Wow.
And we asked the kid, it's like, what's that mean? It's like, I don't know. I remember it because it was weird to me. Like, why is he saying this? Because he just kept saying it in repeat. So for some of these people, I have no issues. He got lifed. He never gets out. But it's one of those that the fact that he was subject to life, if he recommitted, didn't dissuade him from recommitting offenses. Instead, it upped the ante for him. It made it so that, okay, well, now I have to kill him.
Yeah, like might as well. I'm getting life. So
yeah. So
let me get as much as I can out of this.
Yeah. So ask and you shall receive. He's in for life. But it's one of those, I still continue to enjoy it. I did have to kind of take a little bit of a step back in terms of what I'm prosecuting now, just to get in a better, I think, office environment for me. But it's also fun going backwards where there is a lot of pressure with dealing with murderers and the stakes being so high. When you get to take a step back, you can kind of breathe and be like, okay, like I'm now dealing with, a DUI manslaughter, which once again, there are victims, it's serious, but it's one of those that it's not, nobody's going to go away for life for it. I take it just as seriously, but I'd be lying if there wasn't some pressure that's kind of relieved where, this isn't a cold-blooded killer like Parkland, for example, because we're bordering on some of those that talk about pressure in terms of that prosecution. I could imagine what they were going through.
Yeah. Definitely. So this portion of the program I like to call "Explain It to Me Like I'm a 4-Year-Old." You ever watched Philadelphia? That is my favorite line that Denzel uses. So Ricky, I'm going to ask you, fentanyl. All I know is it's bad and it's addictive. I'm assuming through your work you have experience with that drug and prosecuting people involved in that drug. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what that drug is, why it's bad, et cetera?
It's basically a incredibly powerful sedative, much stronger than heroin. You don't have to knowingly consume it. We've had instances where our officers, UCs, buy it, whatever, and they end up overdosing to the extent where, no lie, we're having to strip them down naked in the parking lot and rinse them off because they're actively overdosing. We can't really make contact with them knowing that they're, whether it be the inhalation through, not inhalation, but consumption through skin contact or whatever, because our UCs can't go out there, especially with fentanyl, and wear gloves to purchase it. That's a huge red flag. Like, no, I'm not selling dope to you when you're wearing gloves. What are you, a cop? It's like, no. So they have to play the part, and they'll handle it with their hands. And we've had guys overdose just by handling it, and it can be fatal. Luckily for this officer, once again, it was just contact. It wasn't per se inhalation or consumption, but he doesn't look upon the experience as fondly as we do, because we're cracking up because he's overdosing and we're like spraying him down with hoses and whatnot as we're stripping him naked. But it's one of those that it's incredibly tragic, the repercussions of it. And that's part of, while most, I think even within prosecution, don't see drug offenses as a serious thing. It's nonviolent, no victims. I always push back with the flip side of it. It's like, well, what if it was your loved one who was addicted to drugs? What if it was your loved one who's no longer the person that you grew up with, or your child as you recognize him, because he's so addicted to drugs? Are you really going to have that same energy when it comes to prosecuting his drug dealer? And that's really what we focus on. And I think what we recognize, that we're not going after per se the addicts that are just purely addicts. But if you're dealing and you're dealing this stuff, yeah, we got no love lost here. You're going away. But I think statistically, I can't pull the stats for it kind of off the top of my head, but I think there's plenty of support that there's more OD deaths during COVID, during this COVID time period from fentanyl than there have been deaths of COVID. It's one of those that, while leading into or prior to COVID was a big topic, I think COVID has kind of outshined it, if you will, and people have ignored it a lot. But it's scary, and it's one of those that even Florida, I think, has re-upped the minimum mandatory, where now I think you have over and out, and it's a 35-year minimum mandatory.
Wow.
No questions. You get game time, but you're going away.
So is that amount a consumption amount, or is that an amount that you would be dealing?
No. So it would 100% be dealing. And that's one of the other misconceptions that we deal with in terms of juries and during jury selection. I address it a lot because none of the jurors, and I joke with them, my jury selection is bordering on a stand-up routine and a basically kind of a overview of drug and drug trafficking. But one of the ways that I handle it is that I take them through things that they can relate to. And in particular in drugs, 180 or so baggies, like the little dime bags, if you will, those usually amount to just the weight of the substance, 4 grams. That's usually where we hit our trafficking weight in Florida. The minimum trafficking threshold for heroin and for fentanyl is 4 grams. 180 baggies, 180 doses. So the way I usually equate it is chicken nuggets, because everyone at one point in their lives has had a chicken nugget. it's fine to go and have order a 10 piece. That's probably one meal. 20 piece if you're sharing it. Nobody goes and orders, 2,000 chicken nuggets. That's not personal use. And that's how I equate it to a jury through food oftentimes. And even because a lot of it, nobody orders, I need heroin, please. That's not how you order it. And a lot of my job is the wiretaps, where we're listening into the phones. And a lot of it is the coded language. One of the other things that I do with the jury is, once again, food. You go to McDonald's, you order a 20 piece, they tell you, okay, that's going to be $100. Something's off. Like a 20 piece is not $100. That's whatever it is, $5 now. So what you order and how much you're supposed to pay for it. And then the other thing is, you order a 20 piece, they give you $5, or they quote you $5. You're on the same page. The other thing I come back with is like, well, you never said chicken though, right? But you're expecting chicken nuggets. Why? Well, the 20 piece, that's how you order. I don't say I want a 20 piece for 20 burgers. I want a 20 piece for nuggets. Mm-hmm. I don't order a 20 piece for fries. I order fries. So there's a lot of specific language we use, and we use coded language, I think, in our everyday life, that I basically translate that to the dope verbiage. So when we're in trial and they hear, hey, I need a half of the down, and you get a price. So half down is going to be heroin, and the price is going to be $1,400. An ounce of heroin is $2,800. So we know down is going to be the heroin. We know the price is consistent with heroin. So we know the half is going to be half an ounce of heroin. So it gets incredibly complicated, but I always try to bring it back because in part I'm a fatty to food. That is where I can relate to people, and I think they can relate to me. And a lot of it, we just go right back to food. So it's a big problem, and it's coming in just in insane quantities. It's in a large scale. It's taken over basically the coke routes that the cartel have, because there are cartel networks, whether or not you want to accept it. We have them, literally in neighboring on either side of us here in Florida, at least. We know we haven't been able to infiltrate, but I know we've touched on them. We have cartel pipelines, if you will, locally. And I don't work in other areas, but I know that they exist. It's not like we're unique in our situation. But the pipeline and the routes, if you will, that were used to historically bring in coke and whatnot have slowly been converted to bring in fentanyl and meth. Meth is on a huge come up as well. But nasty stuff. I wouldn't wish anybody's loved one be addicted to that. It's a ticking time bomb.
And this is way bigger than what was going on in the 80s with coke, right? Because coke, although an illegal substance, although highly addictive, people did that in the 80s and they're still living life and making money and raising children and whatever. With this stuff, it's killing people.
And while coke is still dangerous, the fatality rate is nowhere near what it is for coke. And we even talk about it, Rene and I, in terms of our concerns, because we live near Disney, and our biggest concern has always been man, in terms of a terrorist attack, you don't have to get crazy with it. You need a drone and you need fentanyl, and you dust it during one of the parades. That has always been a huge concern of mine, especially as deadly as it can be. Its effects are nowhere near what coke is in terms of its mortality. Because coke, you use it and you may end up overdosing and dying, but in large part, the effects of it's going to hype you up. That's why, in large part, the coded language up coke, it's a pick me up. Down goes to heroin, goes to fentanyl. It's one that basically suppresses your central nervous system. When you see the people that are walking around like zombies, just completely out of it, dozing, like in and out of consciousness. We just saw it, I think, last week when we went to Hibachi. These girls were, as they're on their phone, just and out, like completely out. And it's one of those, like, I felt for the parents because they were there with their parents, but they were both obviously high on either heroin or fentanyl. It's just scary, like all around. And at any moment, once again, coke will bring you up. Heroin will shut down your central nervous system. If you use too much, you just get shut down. You're not breathing, you just die.
Wow. Yeah, it's a tragedy. We were told how bad drugs were and the DARE program and all that stuff. And in that time, in that time, they've just gotten worse.
Yeah, I mean, we were warned about weed, and it's like, all right, we don't have to worry about weed. Weed's like the least of our worries.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the general sentiment, public policy wise, is exactly that. And to the point where they're even kind of, were we too harsh on it? And that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I get it. I mean, I got a job to do, but I'm pretty open about, in terms of how much I care about weed. It's like, I don't, like, at all. If I have to prosecute a case, I will. And the thing about weed isn't so much, there's no, in large part, danger to the drug, but it is the money drug, because everyone does weed. And I think a pound of good weed is going for, man, it could go $4 or $5 grand. Whereas an ounce of heroin is $2,600, $2,800 and the risk reward is just such that it's honestly, in terms of a business perspective, not worth trafficking a heroin or fentanyl, because you just need an ounce and you're at a 25-year minimum mandatory. You need a minimum of 25 pounds of weed to get to a 3-year minimum mandatory. Like, it makes no financial sense to traffic in anything other than cannabis. So not an endorsement to be a drug trafficker, but
these sentencing guidelines that you're speaking of, are they federal or are these state in Florida?
So feds and state have different ones. We oftentimes go back and forth with our federal prosecution counterparts, and they have better or harsher gun minimum mandatories. By and large, we have better drug trafficking minimum mandatories, but they work differently. The feds, for example, they can aggregate. So if we have a year-long investigation and they're bringing in 20 pounds of weed every week for, 10 weeks, they can add every single week and charge you with a trafficking. At the state level, it's every specific instance. So if you bring in, 20 pounds of weed every week for the 10 weeks, we never reach a trafficking because you only did 20 pounds at a time. The feds can go ahead and add all those together. And it's just a different way in which the statute is structured. So if we're in a situation like that, they may take the case where we don't reach a trafficking threshold. But if, for example, we have an ounce of heroin, fentanyl, whatever, where we have a 25 or 35-year minimum mandatory, theirs might only be 5 or 10. So they'll usually let us take that, and they'll kind of kick back for it if there's a gun involved or anything like that.
Gotcha. So Rene, do you have anything that you would like to teach the audience, or dispel any myth or anything like that of that nature?
I don't know about anything specific, but just be wary, because I see a lot of lawyers doing social media marketing where they're almost giving legal advice about things. And some of them, when they talk about things like criminal law and what you can do when a cop pulls you over, or warrants or things like that, some of them, say things that sound like absolutes, that if somebody were to kind of follow it, might find themselves in a lot of trouble. So just be wary. Take all of those things with a grain of salt. Not everything is 100%. Where in certain situations you might say, well, you need a warrant, or I'm not going to do this. There might be other situations where you can't do that for whatever reason. So nothing is ever absolute. It's always general. There's always going to be exceptions. So just please don't rely on the social media lawyers. That's basically my advice. They're just giving very general opinions, and law is all about the specific facts. So be careful.
That's a very good lesson. I'm thinking of those TikTok lawyers that tell you certain explicitives when you get pulled over.
Yes. Don't think that you can just follow a script. It may work because you might be in the right situation, but facts are important. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're thinking, well, the TikTok lawyer said I could do this, it might not work for you. So just be careful.
Do you think if they issue a disclaimer that is sufficient to insulate the attorney themselves?
I think that's going to be such an interesting area that the courts are going to have to address at some point. I don't know that a disclaimer is enough. A lot of it depends on the messaging, right? A lot of it, if the lawyer is clear and saying, well, you can only do this in certain situations, maybe that's enough to that a disclaimer will work. But I've seen some of them where they're saying, here's your script for when you're pulled over, or, here's your script for if you have drugs, and, police officers talking to you, or whatever it is. That to me, that's dangerous. And I think that lawyers need to be held accountable. So I don't know. We're going to see what the courts do with that. I think it's really interesting. It's new. Somebody's going to have to pioneer that. We'll see.
I think that would be a great CLE on its own.
That would be fantastic.
I mean, we could go many different ways of it, but the disclaimer itself and what is legal advice, what constitutes legal advice, what does not, how to give proper disclaimers, what to do when someone in a different jurisdiction has a general question, like, can you help without giving them legal advice? Like, if they understand that you're not giving them legal advice, like, I think that would be a wonderful CLE. You should pitch it to somebody.
I should. I mean, and then, as the laws change, what's your responsibility to go back and edit your content? Like, I remember when we were in law school, Arizona versus Gantt came out, and that was huge because it changed so much of, criminal investigations, on the road. And, if something like that were to happen now, what responsibilities do these marketing lawyers have to advise people that their content needs to be changed? It's interesting. It's definitely interesting. Somebody needs to take this up.
We've been in the midst of a lot of change because Arizona versus Gantt came out. Then they kind of backed off it a little bit. When we came out, cell phones were good. You didn't need a search warrant. You can get into them. And now it's like, nope, you need a search warrant for a cell phone. The other thing is, even PIN codes, for a time, you can get it compelled. It wasn't testimonial, and they backed off that. Now it's testimonial. You can't force someone to give up the PIN code to their cell phone. So I think as technology evolves, we have a lot of law that is going to change, and you put yourself in a dicey position when you're advertising by giving legal advice in areas that are completely unsettled.
That's a good point. So one last question for you both. Any advice to future law students or future lawyers? I'll go with you first, Rene.
When somebody tells me that in my real life, I tell them why. Why are you doing it? Don't do it. But that's just me being my sarcastic self. I think the world needs good lawyers. I think we are seeing a time, politically, socially, we're seeing it in crime. We're seeing it in all aspects of our society where the world needs good lawyers. And, I think if you've got what it takes, go for it. Surround yourself with people that are going to lift you up, that are going to make you better, and enjoy the time, especially going into law school. I mean, we touched on that. It was such a great, carefree time in our lives. Yes, it was very stressful. But I look back on it with nothing but fondness. And, take it seriously, but enjoy your time.
Ricky?
I think, kind of echoing Renee, think deep and hard about why you're going to law school, because it is hard. I think oftentimes we talk about how nice it would be to have a job where at the end of the day it's over, where we don't have that. We always have a timeline. We always have something that is pending, and it doesn't end ever. And the amount of pressure I think that we are constantly under is tough, and not just the pressures from the case, but even I think the conduct of the other attorneys. I think we are in the midst of just a de-evolution of the profession with regards to professionalism itself. You saw it in maybe you didn't see it, but in the Parkland shooting case, that's the mass shooting here in Florida, where defense counsel was caught on video flicking the judge the bird I think it was mid victim impact statement, where they're literally flicking the judge off, and she had called him out on it. And it's one of those that it's tough, especially for me as a prosecutor, where I'm expected to take the high road in every single instance. And that's not usually the case for the other side. We get into a lot of situations where, like I had one case where we're at trial management conference where we're just trying to work things out. Do we need interpreters, anything like that? What's the offer? Is it accepted or rejected? We just need it on the record. And the defendant blurts out to the judge. So it's not protected at all. Judge, I was acting in self-defense. Up until that point, the defense had been ID. It's like, well, your ID claim is shot. Like, you're done. Your client just admitted on the record, unprompted, that he was acting in self-defense. It's an affirmative defense. So good luck, you're stuck. Defense counsel, first things out of their mouths in opening statements is, it's horrible what happened to the victim, but it wasn't my client. And I'm like, you are ethically barred from making arguments you know to be false. And I bring it up to the judge, and the judge's reaction was essentially, I agree, but that's a bar issue. That's not an issue as it relates to the rules of evidence. There's nothing rules of evidence wise that prevents him from doing so. So it was one of those that, like, okay, we are playing, and not to make it a game, but we're going through this trial with attorneys that I know will not follow the rules of ethics. And I'm not willing to sink that low in order to get a conviction, but that's not always true of the other side. So know what you're getting into, because it's not, not everyone here is playing by the same rules, if you will. And the other thing is, once again, going back to why are you doing this? Because oftentimes, at least, as a prosecutor, I think it's kind of at times romanticized, like, we're the good guys, we're this and that. And I think the longer I get into it, the more I realize, like, well, good, bad, that's a matter of perspective. And at this point, I realize I'm not the good guy to any of the defendants. It is what it is. I'm only the good guy to the victim. So it's one of those that kind of be sure in yourself and be sure in what you're doing, or why you're doing what you're doing. But otherwise, enjoy the experience, because if you can kind of set the pressure aside and learn to just handle it and set that aside and have your home life, because that, I think, is the most important thing, being able to find that balance. Like for me, no matter the trial, no matter what, I'm not missing basically bedtime with my kids. I will leave trial, come have dinner, bedtime, and I'll go back to trial prep, and I'll be out of the house by 5 a.m. If need be. But I do make it a point to have that balance. So just know what you're getting yourself into, and it's not all just piles of money and yacht trips. It's hard work, and it's pressure that basically never lets up.
Thank you. I like that. So Ricky and Rene, thanks so much. I know how busy you guys always are. I don't know how you do it. You manage to be everywhere and work hard. I think you probably sleep 3 hours a night. I think that's the secret. But thanks so much for joining. I think we had a very Very informative conversation, and I hope others learn from your lessons and your stories.
Thank you, Mark.
To all my listeners, stay solid and hit the subscribe button. Hey, Piano Man, take us out.
Need a lawyer? Are you having financial, criminal, or family challenges? Call or text the Mark Kachi Law Firm, 215-439-7899.